Deborah Cowles walked into the bunkhouse at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning in March, with an attorney's letter in her hand and said, "Sam, I have to marry someone before Friday morning, or Ada takes the homestead." Sam Marsh, 29, foreman of the Cowles homestead since Isaac Cowles had hired him at 20 and 75, looked up from the ledger he was keeping at the bunkhouse table. He said, "Ada, Isaac's grown daughter." Deborah said, "Ada." "Yes." Sam said, "Read me the letter." Deborah read him the letter. Isaac Cowles, plain, honest wheat farmer of Cutbank, dead of a lung sickness in November of the previous year, had left a will he had written himself at his own plank table 3 years back that granted the whole of his estate to the family Cowles. Isaac had, at the time of the will, been married to Deborah 2 years and had had one small son by her, Jonah, aged 1. He had also had a grown daughter by a first marriage, Ada Cowles, 34, married to a Denver attorney called Bram Peel. Isaac had died in November. Deborah had, since November, been running the homestead alone with Sam as foreman and Jonah as her small companion. The will had been filed at the county court in December. Judge Waite had, at the December filing, ruled that the family Cowles was, on its face, ambiguous, and had asked the two claimant parties, Deborah as widow and Ada as adult child, to reach a plain, honest settlement between themselves within 90 days, or Judge Waite would rule on the ambiguity himself. The 90 days ended on Friday morning. Ada Peel's attorney husband had, in the letter Deborah had just read to Sam, informed Deborah that Ada would be filing on Friday morning for the whole of the homestead, under the doctrine that the family Cowles meant Isaac's blood family, that is, Ada, as sole grown blood daughter, because Deborah was not a blood Cowles, and Jonah, as a minor, could not hold homestead title. Ada would allow Deborah to remain on the homestead as a life tenant of the residence, with a small stipend of $10 a month. Deborah would forfeit all interest in the 200 acres of wheat and the barn and the stock. Ada Peel's attorney husband had written this on Ada Peel's authority. Deborah Cowles said, at the bunkhouse table, "Sam, Judge Waite told me in December in confidence at the courthouse that the only way to close the ambiguity in my favor was to hold a plainly married household headed by a plainly married widow of Isaac Cowles at the time of the Friday filing." He said a plainly married widow with the plainness of a judge who has watched two families lose 200 acres to Denver attorneys in the last 3 years and does not want to watch a third. He did not tell me who to marry. He told me plainly, however, that the marriage had to be filed and stamped at the county clerk before 9 o'clock on Friday morning, or Ada's attorney would file first and take the estate on his own reading of Judge Waite's ambiguity. Deborah Cowles said, "Sam, I am asking you plainly, please marry me at the courthouse on Thursday morning. I am asking as a business partner. I have thought about it since Saturday. I have not slept 2 nights. I am asking you because you have been my foreman 4 years, because Isaac trusted you at his own plank table before he died, and because I trust you now. I will not press you into anything beyond the marriage of law. I will pay you a raised foreman's wage. I will put you on the deed of the homestead as a joint tenant. Ada's Denver attorney's argument dies the moment a plainly married widow files first. That is my plan. Please answer plainly." Sam Marsh looked at his own ledger. He said, "Deborah." She said, "Sam." He said, "I will marry you on Thursday morning." She said, "Why?" He said, "Because Isaac paid me a foreman's wage for 4 years and trusted me at his own plank table before he died. Because I have watched Ada Cowles at the funeral in November stand on her father's grave in fine Denver clothes and speak to her half-brother Jonah as if he were a small tax burden. Because I have thought about the plain shape of what Ada was going to do since December, when I heard about the ambiguity at the mercantile. Because I have been meaning to say yes to you across the plank table for 4 years and have not had a plain, honest reason to. This is a plain, honest reason. That is my answer." Deborah Cowles said, "Sam." He said, "Yes." She said, "That last sentence. Please say it again in plain hearing at the plank table tonight where I can think about it." Sam Marsh said, "Yes." Judge Waite married Sam Marsh and Deborah Cowles at the county courthouse at 11 on Thursday morning. Old Sylvan, the second hand, gave the bride away. Judge Waite's own wife, Netta, stood witness for Deborah. Waite's clerk stood witness for Sam. Deborah wore a plain slate blue dress and a small sprig of prairie yarrow at her collar. Sam wore his one good coat. Jonah, 1 and 11 months old, sat on Netta Waite's lap and held the ring on a folded piece of blue muslin without dropping it. Judge Waite signed the marriage license with a plainly satisfied face. He said, at the courthouse door, "Deborah, Sam, please file at the clerk's office within the hour. I will personally review Ada's Peel's filing at 9 on Friday morning to ensure it does not creep in ahead of yours." Deborah said, "Sir." Judge Waite said, "Do not thank me. I am doing my job." Deborah filed at the clerk's office at 11:45. Ada Peel's attorney husband filed at 9:02 on Friday morning. He was informed by the clerk that Deborah Cowles Marsh had filed her plainly married widow petition 22 hours earlier. Ada Peel's attorney husband filed a plain, honest scowl at the clerk. The clerk did not comment. Judge Waite ruled from the bench at 10:15 that Deborah Cowles Marsh's petition satisfied the plain, honest closure of the family Cowles ambiguity, and that the homestead in whole and in part was hers and her husband Sam Marsh's under a plain, honest joint tenancy that would pass, at either of their deaths, to Jonah Cowles as sole beneficiary. Ada Peel went back to Denver. She did not send a Christmas card. She had never sent one. Sam moved into the ranch house on the Friday afternoon. He took the small back bedroom off the mudroom. Deborah kept her own room. Jonah kept his own small room. They ate at the plank table together and ran the wheat farm together. Sam continued to draw his foreman's wage. Deborah continued to keep the household. The homestead ran plainly and honestly. They did not, in April, or in May, or in June, speak of the plainer conversation Sam had raised at the bunkhouse. Deborah waited for him to raise it plainly at the plank table. Sam waited for her to raise it plainly at the plank table. Old Sylvan, at the bunkhouse porch, waited for either of them to raise it plainly at the plank table, and grew quietly impatient over the summer with both of them. On the last Sunday of July, at supper, old Sylvan set down his fork and said, "Boss, ma'am." Sam said, "Sylvan." Deborah said, "Sylvan." Sylvan said, "I have been watching the two of you at this plank table 5 months. You have not raised the plainer conversation. I am 71, and I have watched 2 other couples miss the plainer conversation entirely, because they were plain, honest people who were afraid to press. I am telling both of you at this plank table tonight that if you do not raise the plainer conversation at some point in the next fortnight, I will raise it for you, and you will not be pleased with the way I raise it." Sam Marsh looked at Deborah. Deborah looked at Sam. She said, "Sam, Sylvan is being kind." Sam said, "Sylvan, I would rather not be raised for." Sylvan said, "Then you and the boss lady raise it yourselves. Tonight I am going to bed." Sylvan went to bed. Deborah said, "Sam." Sam said, "Deborah." She said, "The plainer conversation." He said, "I have been in love with you since the bunkhouse table on the Tuesday in March. I have not raised it because you married me for a plain, honest reason, and I did not want to press against the plain, honest reason." Deborah said, "I have been in love with you since the mercantile last November, when I saw you buy Jonah a small carved wooden horse, without telling me you had. I have not raised it because you married me for a plain, honest reason, and I did not want to press against the plain, honest reason." Sam said, "Then neither of us has pressed against the plain, honest reason. We have both waited for the other two." Deborah said, "That would appear to be the case." Sam said, "Then it is raised." Deborah said, "It is raised." He came around the plank table. He knelt beside her chair. He took her hand. He said, "Deborah Cowles Marsh, will you be my wife not only in the plain, honest sense of law, but in every plainer, honester sense of a plank table?" Deborah said, "Yes." 2 years on a warm September evening at the Cowles Marsh homestead, Deborah Marsh sat on the porch step with Sam beside her. Jonah, 3 and a half now, was in the yard chasing a small brown chicken. A small daughter, called Silva, out of plain honest gratitude, was 6 months old and asleep against Sam's chest. Old Sylvan was 73 now, and pretending, on the bunkhouse porch, that he did not know the baby had been named for him. Sam said, "Deborah." Deborah said, "Sam." He said, "Ada Peel wrote." Deborah said, "What?" He said, "She is divorcing Bram Peel." Deborah said, "Good." Sam said, "She sends her regards to Jonah." Deborah said, "Write her back in the return post with a plain, honest paragraph. Tell her Jonah is well. Tell her he received her regards. Tell her the homestead is running plainly, and that she is welcome at Christmas if she would like to come." Sam said, "You are a generous woman." Deborah said, "I am the widow her father would have wanted her to marry, if she had been born a man and had been in a plain, honest homestead ambiguity of her own." Sam laughed once. He kissed his wife's temple. The pasture went to gold. Jonah caught the chicken. Sylvan the baby slept. And Deborah Cowles Marsh, who had walked into her own bunkhouse at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning in March, with an attorney's letter in her hand, and had asked her foreman to marry her by Friday morning at the courthouse, put her cheek against her husband's shoulder, and understood that the good, slow country had, in its good, slow way, arranged a Denver attorney's plain, honest greed and a plain, honest ambiguity in her late husband's plank table will, and had, on the strength of those two plain, honest complications, given her the plainer, better household under her own homestead roof that Ada Peel's Denver attorney husband had, in his own greedy, plain, honest way, prevented her from thinking of on her own. And so it had.